Whoa! Hello there, Travis. What are we actually seeing starts to get complicated? It was easy. It will start to separate. Are definitely not behind that restricted access rate. They're not. Forget about it.
None of them will be able to be revived.
So please, be reasonable, returning to the orientation we usually the private traditional. A stabby, but I don't think. And those rectangular outcroppings weren't. Here is my Catwoman glove and glove. I should have a floating, impossible anti-gravity blah blah blah. Now, if we were to take it, snapshots, eventually, how do you transmit of discrete shells?
Well, Ari, we've been tracking this thing for weeks and we still don't know what it is.
The basilisk has its eyes on you now. What are you going to do? And at some point, the acceleration is going to get so high that you're going to pass 9.8 meters. Look, I know that neither of those examples were fun. A screaming fish on this side would never be fun, leaving me weightless no matter where I am. What the? We generate our heat endogenously or within our own bodies. I give killer high fives. Is it? Is it? This story is only one of a dozen. Okay, good, because it's rock, paper, scissors. Where are you right now? Bam. The fingerling. That fingerling. Isn't that wild? Fingerling.
It's good coffee. Oh, I'm sorry, what were we talking about?
Jat, look, I know, all right? I know. It's getting kind of rowdy in there, okay? But this is something I feel like I must do. Hello, and welcome to Office Hours, a live component of the facility where good old Professor Kyle here opens up his aperture-shaped doors and allows all of you, members of the general public who are willing to sit down, talk about science and reality with me. So about for the next hour or so, we're going to talk about some topics that have been wowing me this week in science. We'll be taking all your comments and questions. If you stick with me today, if you're civil, if you respect our mods today, we will go through all of your questions. Everyone who's willing to stay here, not be a meme lord and spam and all caps and stuff, you'll be nuked from orbit. Everyone who's willing to do that, I promise I will dedicate minutes of my time to acknowledge what you have to say. Okay? People liking my outfit? It's a big crew neck. Anyway, be respectful in the chat. Let's be respectful of my mods, Heather and Jay. They'll come down hard on you. But of course, if you really, really, really want me to see something, you can try simping for science. In this context, it's going towards a facility. I have to fix that light. See? So, with the 10 says, hey Kyle, I'm a huge fan of your channel, and I was curious as to whether or not you are LGBTQ friendly. I'm non-binary and want your thoughts on that. If not, totally cool. Again, love your channel. Well, Sue, thank you for simping. Of course, I'm friendly to all humans. Simple as that. Chris Sparks with the 500! As his legend grows, he took his private jet that he got from Aspen straight down into the facility, right into his front row seats. Chris with a 10. Is there any real-life analog to redundant organs like Krogan in the Mass Effect? Says Chris Rab with the 10. I'm not actually, redundant implies that there's an evolutionary reason. There's an evolutionary pressure that created extra organs in the Krogan. I guess that's their warlike state. In animals and humans and other organisms, I guess the closest thing is vestigial. Like we once thought the pancreas was, or a vestigial tail, or an extra bone somewhere. We thought those had a function, but now we consider some of those to be vestigial. We don't use them anymore. So I think that's closest to redundant, but having things in your body that don't do anything, aren't selected for. They might fall out of the selection, which is why they can become vestigial, but they're not selected to have something that does nothing. That's a evolution, and how it works that way is a good refutation of you only use 10% of your brain, for example. It's very unlikely that you'd have... Did you know that the majority of your metabolism goes to your brain? It'd be very unlikely if the majority of the reason why you eat, if 90% of that was unused. Now, I know a lot of you have been waiting in here for the chat to get to our little vaccine worksheet today. Mandatory Sin says, with the 50, says, will you answer the question? Yes. I don't see what question. I was looking at Kevin's monitor, has the camera on. He was trying to... Mandatory, I will get to your question, but first... Once I figure out what it was. But first, we need to start today. I feel like it might be a long one, but hopefully it's an educational one. Mandatory giving another 5, saying this question. Which question? Will you answer this question? What are you talking about? Anyway, I will monitor how rowdy you're getting up in the chat, but first... There is a new study that highlights what I think is a disconnect that the public is having in regards to getting vaccines. It seems like a large component of vaccine hesitancy, as it's been called, has to do with some perceived high probability of side effects or bad side effects. We can get into all of that today if you... Well, stick with me. So, anyway, so what we're going to do today, we're going to handle this kind of like a little, I mean, and I know it's going to seem like, oh, who are you? I'm a science guy. Not an expert, but that's why we can go through the basics and learn together. What we're going to do today is sort of like a college lecture. So we are going to go through step by step everything that we know so far about side effects, how they work, that kind of thing. And then at the end, class, we will take your questions. I promise. Okay? It's the efficacy that most people are worried about. Why take a shot for no reason, says Vertical View in the chat. Well, that's a great place to start. And I could share out this worksheet. If you enjoyed, if it's been helpful to you as we go through it. I could gladly use more info to educate patients in my hospital, says Trevor G. Alyssa Rhonda with the 50, have a round on me. Also get a double round for your moderators. Okay, so let's begin. So with that question, an efficacy question. So we are going to do it. Yes, we are going to do it like this. Okay, what are mRNA vaccines, chat? So, seems like the most basic question that I will see from people. And we'll go through this. Okay, so mRNA vaccines based on 20-year-old technology. The basis for using RNA to jumpstart your immune system has been around for a long time. Now, the fact that these vaccines came out so quickly is both amazing. I mean, it's not surprising. Scientists all over the entire planet working towards one thing. It's not that surprising that it happened that quickly, especially with the pressure of a pandemic. But also, there is decades of research behind these kinds of things. So that's one reason it came out so quickly. What are they? They use mRNA to create proteins. So mRNA is the messenger RNA. It's the in your body, things, your body basically works by your cells read your DNA, send out a little strand of a single strand, not a double helix, but a single strand out into your cell. This is messenger RNA. Your cell then reads this RNA, mRNA, and according to those instructions, creates proteins, and those proteins go on to do something in your body. Now, these proteins are so-called spike proteins, and these mimic what are on the outside of the COVID virus. And MR says, way to change zero minds, my dude. We didn't even start yet. Keep an open mind, but not so open that your brain falls out, MR. You know what I'm talking about, buddy? So, it creates spike proteins. Now, these spike proteins trigger immune responses from your body without giving you COVID. That's the important point here. So, your body, let me move this for you a little bit. Your body is getting the signal of these proteins, and then your immune system is learning what these spike proteins look like, so that the next time, if you encounter COVID with these same spike proteins on the outside, your body will be like, huh, and it will mount an immune response before you get terribly ill. Now, question in the chat was about efficacy. These are some of the most efficacious. This is fun, typing and talking at the same time. These are some of the most efficacious vaccines ever created. With variants now, you're going to have to forgive my spelling as I do this. 80 to 95% plus efficacy. Now, that should be amazing in and of itself. When we're talking about efficacy, it means if two groups, one gets the vaccine and one does not, the reduction in overall mortality is 95%. So if both, it's like, I like to say, like wearing a bulletproof vest. It's like wearing a bulletproof vest, chat, where both people, if two people get shot and one is wearing a vest, that person is much less likely to die. Now, it's not impossible, and you can still get hurt when you get shot wearing a bulletproof vest, but you're much, much less likely to die. Go Tanks with the 10 was cleaning out the lower levels and accidentally tossed a huge crate of plaques into the incinerator. I knew it! Patrick Combs with a 10. Thank you. Ryu with a 10. You better talk about how mRNA is basically custom immune system programming. Yes, so now that's another good point. By using mRNA inside vaccines, no genetic manipulation. There's none. So like we said, how your body works, it reads your DNA, the genes transcribed in your ATCG bases, it sends out mRNA as a messenger to go create stuff. Gene manipulation would be to change your DNA in your cells and tell your cells themselves to make spike protein, but that's not what's happening. We're injecting mRNA into the cells, no genetic transcription necessary at all. So it doesn't use your DNA, it doesn't alter your DNA. No altering of DNA. Now I can tell this is already gonna take a little while. Rolly Cruz says, "No, don't take the vax." Well, hey man, you can take that bulletproof vest off, but if there was a plague of people running around with machine guns, you probably want to wear one. A cooler guy, with the Australian 420 $2.69. Nice. It says, thanks for the Kyle persona. Hopefully without derailing too much, but with the various TM going about, what has been an interesting or good side effect about how people have been acting like everyone's social distancing or calling? Thanks for the info, my dude. I will probably social distance forever, but I was doing that beforehand. So these mRNA vaccines, that's kind of the basic overview. It doesn't fully protect you. Nothing in medicine does, but they're extremely efficacious. Some of the most efficacious vaccines ever created. They don't manipulate your DNA. They go one step ahead of it and create the messenger RNA themselves. So, what are class vaccine side effects? So, the most common vaccine well, you go that way then. Much better. What are vaccine side effects? Okay. They range from extremely unlikely. We're talking at least one in 1 million cases, like Guillain-Barré syndrome, and death. COVID. So you have extremely rare side effects, which are like Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is kind of like being allergic to the vaccine, and you have side effects like death, like a crazy misreaction to the vaccine, or some comorbid complications. Now, these are extremely rare, and they are less rare than dying from something like COVID. So again, it's like wearing a bulletproof vest. If you are going to experience a death-defying thing, or a near-death thing, you'd rather have some protection than not. Because again, less likely. And we know, because we know this because now hundreds of millions of doses delivered over last few years. So now we have hundreds of millions of doses delivered across many, many months, over almost 2 years now. It's not a vaccine, it's a booster. It says username 42. Same mechanism. MC Dude says, what's your source of info? Pfizer? No, actually, multiple companies across the planet, from Russia, China, Mexico, the United States, Canada, everywhere. And when MC Dude, the thing is when multiple different institutions say exactly the same thing, and they're not really politically, trust me, politically on the same page, you get a better sense that what they're saying is closer to the truth. So now we know that these are extremely unlikely side effects. But what aren't, and so that ranges from extremely likely to fairly likely. Now every medication, every medical intervention, as we will call them, First Utopia says the vaccine does have worrying side effects. Well, First Utopia, we're getting into it right now. There are fairly likely side effects with vaccines, and they fall into two groups. There are local side effects. Now, these are local at the injection site side effects. Thank you for always being awesome, says Brandu the Gaming. How long does the initial dose stay in your system versus the boosters? Well, given the timing on the boosters, it gives you a sense of how often your immune system needs to be exercised. First Utopia, let's do it. Fairly likely side effects. These are local at the injection site. You've probably experienced these before. Redness, swelling, soreness at the injection site. I myself, of course, have experienced these. You get the shot in your arm right where you got injected right into your body hurt, and it was sore. But then we have systemic, so full body. Then we also have full body side effects. Plavuki says side effects like death is 1 in 20,000, not 1 in a million. Actually, that's not true. We will get to that when we talk about the problem with self-reporting. Now, systemic is different. Systemic is something that's not local, obviously. It's your whole body. That's like headache, fever, fatigue, that kind of thing. So full body side effects. And these are by far the most common. Okay? Now, before we talk about what is the likelihood of having some bad reaction to a vaccine, before we get to, so if you're of the opinion that the vaccines are very likely to do something to you because of the vaccine, we first have to talk about something else. Because we have to check that claim, because we are scientists, or trying to think like scientists, correct? What are placebo effects? David Evans, 50 in the chat. Hey, show, love the Kyle. Thank you for fighting bad information and giving people facts. David, anyone in the chat who's still not, who still wants to challenge me on these things as we go through them, class, please save your questions towards the end. Oh, what did I do? Oh. Towards the end, we will get to your questions, I promise. So to make sure that side effects that we see from a COVID vaccine, and make sure they are from the vaccine specifically, we must check on so-called placebo effects. Now, placebo effects, any positive outcome or reported change in experience, like how you're feeling, that is both physically and pharmacologically, not caused by the intervention. Okay? So when you measure a placebo effect, don't forget the nocebo effect. Just a second. The placebo effect, when you do a medical study or a medical trial, and you perform the intervention, whether that's a shot, whether that's taking a pill, whether that's a surgery or a medical device, you ask people afterwards how they feel. Do you feel better? As one report on outcome. Do they feel better? You ask two groups of people that same question. One group had nothing done to them, or a fake version done to them. This is the placebo arm. Like getting, well, we'll get to that. And the other group of people did have something done to them. If both of them report feeling better, that means there's some outcome that wasn't caused by the intervention, right? So, an example. Give one group of people aspirin for muscle pain. Give another similar group a sugar pill without telling them it's not aspirin. Now, if both groups saw some benefit, then the aspirin has some placebo effect. So you've probably seen this working before, and you know of placebo effects, you know that you could feel better, even if nothing happens. Now, the opposite of this are nocebo effects. Nocebo, from meaning eye harm. So this is similarly, copy that here, any negative outcome, sorry, thinking about money, any negative income that can't be linked to the intervention that you are having. And we also notice these where, well, what could possibly cause these? Beep, beep. What could possibly make you feel worse after nothing is done to you? Well, this is a misattribution of the ebb and flow of normal health. So in your day-to-day life, let me catch up here. Ozzy with the 30, vaccines so effective that they even save people with no access to vaccines. Just check it out. Brandon Roth, you are very brave to having this by having this conversation with the 10, both paramedic and vax injured here. Paramedic and vax injured, says Chet. What my colleagues and I are seeing with injuries is alarming. Blood clots, myocarditis, and menstrual issues. Just saying, with the 5, I'm not pushing past it. Got the booster shot recently, and I did believe I had a side effect, some heart palpitations from it, but I don't regret getting it. So Chet, who's saying paramedic, seeing side effects, bad side effects. There are 2 things to recognize from your experience, Chet, is that how can you rectify what I said with what you said? I said these are extremely rare. But you said you're seeing a lot of them. But of course, consider your experience. Being a paramedic, you are much more likely to see any bad side effects. It's your job. And so there's a confirmation bias that can happen when day in and day out you see the worst of the worst things that could happen, even though they're extremely unlikely, and you start to think they're more likely when they're not. I'm sure, well, you know, a lifeguard probably thinks shark attacks are more likely than they are. Nurses and doctors and paramedics like yourself often think there is something to do with the full moon, that there's more injuries and violent crimes and gunshots in the full moon, where instead they are noticing it more because they see it at the same time, and they're misattributing the ebb and flow, as I said, of daily life to something else. Now, in the specific cases of what you're saying with menstruation, myocarditis, that kind of thing, we are still in this regime where the likelihood of having long-term side effects to your heart, to your lungs, to your pulmonary system, far less than COVID. Again, it's like a bulletproof vest. If you are encountering something that is going to have some lasting effect on you, you'd rather be protected, because everything that you're mentioning, every single one of those effects that you're mentioning are worse if you get COVID. And what makes you less likely to get it if 2 people are going to get it, one vaccinated or not, one with an 80 to 95% reduction in mortality? So nocebo effects are misattributing, say, everyone has headaches. You have headaches for seemingly no reason sometimes. If you just happen to be having a headache when you were getting studied, and you said you felt worse afterwards, that isn't attributed to the intervention. It's a so-called nocebo effect. So, bad Balth Hazard says, it's not science, it's business and marketing. Well, that's weird. I don't see a whole lot of marketing in this spreadsheet here. Anyway. This is like an intro medical course, my dude. Let's stay civil here. I'll get to you at the end of the class. I promise. I promised you. We're already 30 minutes in. You see any other public science person or channel taking the time to engage with you like this? I want to. I'm not trying to fool you here. What would be the point of me doing that? So, if we want to figure out what is actually happening with some medical intervention, we have to understand placebo effects. We need multiple groups testing something or not to see if side effects are because of the treatment or not. Because life is complicated. Why scientists try so hard to make controlled studies. Life is complicated. What if you were going into a clinical trial for aspirin, and right before you had you had a headache, so you had a bunch of coffee, and caffeine is known to help with headaches, but then when you're in the study, you said, "Oh yeah, I felt good afterwards," even though you only took a sugar pill. Life is complicated. You could have had myocarditis or something like that. You could have a genetic predisposition to have some terrible side effect, and then you attributed it to the vaccine later. That's possible. How do we know if it's possible? We understand placebo effects and we try to learn about them. And again, this is what we will get into when we talk about the problem with self-reporting. Now, as someone said, if the stream's buffering, just refresh. Now someone said, this is just marketing, dude. They sounded just like that. Well, let's go into a new study. A new study, one of a kind, looking into the placebo effects of vaccines after this long amount of time. Okay? It's a lot. It's a lot of science, okay? So, we are going into this study specifically, which is looking at the frequency of adverse events. This is what we call side effects. 316 Hooligan says, I have no vaccine, no mask, and I feel fine. You're lucky. You're taking advantage of your luck. And in public health, we can't do that. We have stuff like science. Luck has no place there. So we're looking at a study called Frequency of Adverse Events. That's what scientists call side effects in the placebo arms of COVID vaccine trials. Now, if you remember one of our videos at the facility, you remember that we talked about when you're reading a scientific study, the gold standard of what you want to look at are systematic reviews and meta-analyses, because this is not a single study. Instead, this is a study of studies. This study looks at many different studies themselves. Let's get to the many different studies themselves and narrows them down. Okay, let's look. We have 300 different studies that we could look at. We have to remove some because they don't apply. We have to exclude some because they didn't have placebo trials that were accurate. And we get all the studies down into the meta-analysis. And then when we get to the meta-analysis, Derek Yo says blood clots are a potential side effect. Yes, but again, it's more likely with getting COVID. Wear a bulletproof vest when you get shot. Might leave a dang bruise, but you're not going to be dead most of the time. Very unlikely. So when you get into the meta-analysis, you have all of these. When you see these et al., that means all the study authors. So you have all these different studies here with placebo groups and vaccine groups specifically, looking at if there are placebo or nocebo effects for the side effects that people report. Okay? So again, like we said, a lot of you were worried about side effects, but what if the majority of those side effects are not attributed to the vaccine, but rather the ebb and flow and randomness of daily life. In this case, your personal experience doesn't apply. We must separate groups of people into placebo groups and vaccine groups. That's our best way to make life a little bit more like a laboratory setting. So that's why we do it. You can always think of a better way to do it, but this is the practical, scientific way. Okay? So we have a what do we have? What do we have here? We have a meta-anal. Why? Cis. And I'm a child. Systematic review. Looking a study of studies. Okay? So you want to see what the majority of our best studies say. Right. Looks at, and I'll link that up there, huh? I'll do that. Beep. I know it doesn't look great, but I'll figure it out later. Looks at possible nocebo effects inside vaccine side effects. Okay? So I know, chat, you're rowdy. It's fine, okay? I will talk to you individually about your questions and comments once we're almost at the end of this class, okay? Now, here is where Mayro says, the vaccines aren't COVID proof. It's called resistance. Viruses don't care how much you work out. Unfortunately. You can be a Giga Chad and still Giga sad. That didn't work out. So, here's where you have to follow me here. Okay? Those skeptical of you in the chat, here's where you have to follow me. Okay? I'm making this claim. If a large portion of adverse vaccine adverse events can be attributed to nocebo, then anecdotal reports about rampant side effects may be incorrect, misattributed. Okay? So this is where you have to follow me, right? I believe to go further in our little college lecture here, I believe to go any further, you must agree with this statement. If we can give one large group of people the COVID vaccine and another equally demographic group of people a shot, a syringe with saline, nothing in it, nothing. If the group who had nothing done to them reports the same, much of the same side effects as the COVID vaccine, then it's not the vaccine. And I know it feels bad to attribute something to the random chaoticness of life, to people's underlying conditions, to when bad things happen to good people. I know it doesn't feel good. Okay? But if we can show that when most people are complaining about side effects, it's something that would have happened regardless of what was in the syringe, then the COVID-19 vaccine specifically is not the problem. right? If that doesn't feel good to you, flip it the other way. Let's do a reversal test. If you had a really bad headache and I gave you aspirin and I gave your friend a sugar pill and you both took it and you both felt much better, we can say the aspirin didn't do much, right? Or almost didn't do anything. Correct? You following me, Chad? Even if you're skeptical. Okay? We have to accept that even some bad side effects, like even a side effect like dying, you can only tell if it's because of the intervention, if you have two groups of people, one getting it, one believing they're getting it, but not. Because people can die randomly. And if a bunch of people died in a control group, you can't attribute that to what's in the vaccine, correct? And of course, we are comparing the same side effects, not just random side effects, okay? So I think Pissarro says, this is not a true vaccine. It's a designer gene therapy cocktail that is unproven. Incorrect. It's based on 20-year-old technology. It does not alter your DNA. It is physically impossible for the messenger RNA in this intervention to alter your DNA. It's frankly impossible what you're saying. And if nothing I can give to you will change your opinion, if part of your opinion is based on something that's physically impossible, you are being motivated to be contrarian in a way that's not based on facts. Okay. Now, let's get to what this study actually says. I think some of you are with me now, okay? Disconnect says you're paid for by Pfizer. No. No. Brutus Judas says, it's probably great. I just refuse to get it until people stop trying to make me get it. Derek Yo says, Kyle Hill, are you sponsored? Nope. People are trying to make you get the vaccine because it's called a society. And with any society, you entering into that society agree to give up certain personal freedoms and privacies to maintain the integrity of that society. One of those things you give up is a willingness to maintain the public health. If you are unwilling to maintain the public health by, say, doing something that's super simple and free to stop a deadly pandemic, then what you're really angry about is being a part of a society. And if you don't want to be a part of a society, if you don't want to do your part, if you feel like you should have the freedom to not care if other people get sick because of you, then move out into the woods. But we are talking about a global human population. So, now let's look, just so you know where I'm coming from, let's look at the study specifically. Now, can you see my... Oh, no, that's just the window. Okay, so let's capture that. There we go. Now, you can see my hand here, okay? Now, here's my cursor. Now, let's look... I know this isn't the best orientation for this. Let's look at after the first dose of getting... See, these say placebo group and vaccine group. This means the placebo group got saline injected into them, just salty water, nothing. And the vaccine group actually got the COVID vaccine. Let's look at the percentage of participants with any systemic adverse event. Now, systemic event, again, whole body, fatigue, nausea, diarrhea, those kind of things. Let's look at the percentage. Placebo group, 45%, 42%. To the vaccine group, 54, 32, 45. These are different studies. 38, 47, 39, 46, 47, 59. Let's look a little bit closer, because those seem to be a lot of side effects in the group that wasn't getting anything. Okay. Let's look at that again. More specifically, any systemic adverse event in the placebo groups. Placebo. They're receiving nothing. Proportion. Fever. Not many. 15. 16% fatigue. 9% malaise, joint pain. 7% muscle pain. 8% headache. 18% nausea. 2%. Diarrhea, 4%. Let's look at local. 10% have pain, swelling, tenderness. Now, what I'm getting at here by looking at these numbers is that if you get an injection with nothing in it, you are likely to have almost the same side effects. Okay? Now this is critical. This is the critical point, chat, okay? This is a critical point. If you get nothing in a vaccine, you almost have the same amount of side effects as the people who got the vaccine. And not just in similar percentages, but the same side effects. I want you to think about that for just a second while I find something. This nocebo response accounted for 70%, 75%, over 3/4 of systemic adverse events after the first dose of the COVID vaccine. Let that hit. Let that hit, chat. Oh, it's different font. I don't like that. This nocebo response accounted for 76%. And notice here, what's interesting. Notice what's, he actually looks more like Aquaman right now. Just wait. We'll take the hair down and talk to you in just a second. Notice how the study actually kind of points out that this is a nocebo effect with the graph here that looks at the local versus systemic. Now, systemic events, feeling headache or fatigue, you could feel a headache or fatigue for no reason. You could misattribute that to the vaccine. But it is very hard to say that if you got injected with nothing, oh, my arm is super sore and tender in the same way, right? Because that's a physical change. Someone put a needle in your arm, you probably have some redness, you probably have some soreness. Very unlikely to conjure that up from the ebb and flow of daily life, right? And so you see the same thing. How many placebo people had redness? Less than 1%, a third of 1%. Swelling, not even 1%. Tenderness, 9%. They had an injection, that makes sense. Pain, 10%, again, makes sense. But you can't, if tenderness, swelling, redness, fever, chills, fatigue, joint pain, muscle pain, if these things would have happened to you in your daily life anyway, and could just be the result of a needle, if these possibilities explain 70%, 75% of what you are experiencing, then the majority of vaccine side effects are nocebo responses. important yet. Why is this important? Why am I talking about this? Because with so many people talking, so many of you in chat, with so much discourse, adverse event personal reporting can increase vaccine hesitancy. Many of you have probably heard from people about bad side effects or not. Okay? But knowing that the nocebo effect accounts for the majority of side effects, we can say that COVID vaccine, that what's in the COVID vaccine specifically is not the problem. Okay? That can't possibly be true, says Jad Twabi. But it is. But it is. And Jad, you bring up a good point here, or talking point, which is we cannot rely vaccine adverse event reporting system. We cannot rely on self-report. We can't. Why? The same thing that we've been going through all day now, for an hour now, is that if the normal ebb and flow of life, if the randomness of health throughout your life can be misattributed to a vaccine, then we need to do studies on whether or not the vaccine itself is actually doing something. And when we do these studies, when we do studies of studies like this, with dozens of studies in them, with tens of thousands of people studied across years, we find that the majority of self-reported adverse events are nocebo responses, are noise in the signal. They do not, given the data, we cannot say that COVID vaccines specifically have any worse side effects than getting a fake shot and or getting COVID. It's not ignorance, it's called choice, says Andrew Aiken. Yes, you are choosing to not be a part of public health. And in my view, that's unethical. Okay? So given the data, we can't say that COVID vaccines specifically have any worse side effects than getting a fake shot or getting COVID. Again, for all the outcomes that matter, for if you're worried about heart palpitations or myocarditis or lasting pulmonary damage or brain fog for the rest of your damn life, all of that is much worse by getting COVID. Much worse if you get the disease. Much worse. Much worse if you get the disease. That includes blood clots. That includes menstruation problems. All of that is worse. And this is why we can't rely on self-reporting. not controlled. No placebo arm. Humans tend to overemphasize personal, emotional stories over large groups. You can read about someone who said they got the vaccine and then it ruined their life. But we know that more likely than not, that is misattributed. And we can never know for sure if they even know what the truth they're trying to say is, because you have to study it. And if you feel compelled to listen to personal anecdotes from people who say, I got the vaccine and then I had a blood clot or something like that, while it may be true, probably true that they had a blood clot, you can't be sure if it's from the vaccine unless you do studies like this, and so we do them. And I would encourage you to lay the human tendency to overvalue a personal story. I'd lay that aside for a moment and think of millions and millions of people who have died alone without their family, with a tube shoved down their throat, scared. Ethically, morally, where is more harm being done? You can't make me take the vaccine. It's against the law. I don't want to do it. It's my choice. Yes, you are choosing to prioritize your experience and your ethics over millions of people who are dying alone, holding the hand of a nurse they just met or can barely even consciously register. You're valuing your experience over their experience, and they didn't have to have that experience. The real kicker here is that this is preventable. And so, if you choose not to prevent it, knowing the data, knowing how effective these are, if you still choose to deprioritize the suffering and anguish of millions of people that could have been prevented, I think it's unethical. The science is clear. The ethics are not. Ethics is never clear. Ethics always comes down to the person. But given the data, given that this could be prevented, given that we know what people are going through in hospitals, if you want to be a part of a society, is your choice more important than theirs? Gonzalo ignoring everything I just said, but nothing is 100% preventable. By hiding behind a phrase like, but nothing's preventable, you are throwing away tens of millions of lives in bad faith. So what? So what if nothing's preventable? Is 100% preventable? Would you wear a bulletproof vest? Would you wear a seatbelt? It's a ridiculous argument that diminishes the suffering of hundreds of thousands of people on a daily basis. Are you kidding me? So what's the alternative? Do nothing? Then you're a monster. You are an ethical evil in my mind. I'm getting a little rowdy. So now, as promised, it's been an hour. As promised, we will talk to you. Oh man, I was getting a little angry there. Okay. Well, that's because we're adults now. We're adults now. If you're watching, you're probably an adult. It doesn't take that long to understand that, you know, if this was an imposition by your governing body to make everyone do something and it saved 10 people's lives a year in the world. Yeah, we could what if the government mandated that every outdoor area needs to have at least one lightning rod spaced every 50 feet across every open area in the entire planet to save a couple hundred people a year? Yes, that would be ridiculous. And you'd be right to probably oppose some of that. But we're talking about a deadly, mutating respiratory virus that transfers between humans and has already killed probably 5 million people. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. You are bringing the ethical argument you have in that way is like bringing a toothpick to a gunfight. It's not even in the same category. Okay. Oh, man. Grow up. You know? And I should say, like, a lot of this is a cultural thing, too. I mean, there's other places in the world that look at a place like the United States or pockets of the United States that have a lot of unvaccinated people refusing to get vaccinated. Other parts of the world look at us like they don't look at a place, they don't look at those places and they say, wow, now that's freedom. No, they look at those people and be like, wow, that's bad. Patrick Combs with a 50 says, thank you for this. Patrick, thank you for being here. Nathaniel with a 10 says, Kyle, thank you for tackling this important topic. I super appreciate you presenting facts, getting the truth out there. Keep at it, dude. Benjamin Haleman says 5 million people over 2 years is inconsequential, insignificant even. What? Benjamin, you divide those values out and it's equivalent to like a 9/11 every 2 days. If you think 5 million people over 2 years is inconsequential, not only can you not do math, you probably shouldn't be allowed to do math. Okay, I'm getting angry. I know. If you're skeptical of everything that I've said so far, you're probably like, see, Pfizer's playing him to get angry. I'm not going to get angry. I want to take it. We're already past the time we usually do for office hours. Give me a well-intentioned question that you still have. A well-intentioned question. We will talk about it like adults. I'm not going to call any of you out. We're not going to make fun of anybody. I don't think anyone's stupid. No. In a quagmire of misinformation, I don't blame you. I really don't. Everyone gets their boots dirty in the quagmire of misinformation. Everybody, me included. Tanneru says, I want Because Science Kyle back. Hey, man. Me too. I was... turns out when there's a life-changing pandemic for multiple years, seeing how hard a superhero can punch just doesn't... It just seems not quite as impactful. Love you and your content. Dump some science on them. No, we're not. The point of this is not to call people out. It is not to high-five the people that are already on our team. I don't care about that. I want to talk to the people who genuinely want to know. Draconic Author with a 10 says, I appreciate your passion for this. I appreciate your emotions regarding this. I want to say that you're the god of the loud noise that follows lightning due to heat. I like the way of putting that. Okay, I gotta see. Okay, so Chris McNabb, saw you earlier. The question I have is how the vaccine is considered a vaccine when it does not prevent getting it or spreading it. 2 points, Chris. The vaccine does reduce spread. Not 100%, but nothing does. And it does prevent developing the COVID disease. So on those 2 points, unfortunately, you're incorrect. But we call the vaccine a vaccine because vaccines can do a few different things. Vaccines, I'll just pick 2 of them. Vaccines can reduce spread, but they can also just not reduce spread as much, but reduce overall mortality. So the COVID vaccines right now, that's their main function. They reduce mortality. Why? Because this virus is probably going to infect billions of people. And so to bring the death count down, we want to reduce overall mortality. These vaccines also reduce spread. But mortality is the real thing we're looking at. That's why. Edmund Noir with the $100 donation. Sorry for the trolls. You rock. No, if you want to genuinely ask me a question, let's do it. 2-part question. When do you think the pandemic will end now that we have vaccines? Also, do you think we'll be mining on the moon in our lifetime? In our lifetime, mining on the moon? Maybe. But I'm not going to live that long. When do you think the pandemic will end based on our vaccination? That is up, unfortunately, and it's going to sound like a talking point, but a big part of the vaccine ending is everyone getting vaccinated. Oh, of the pandemic ending, sorry, is everyone getting vaccinated. And as long as we have substantial pockets of people not getting vaccinated, it prolongs the suffering. It increases the number of boosters we need to get. COVID is now going to be endemic. We're going to see it for all of human history now. It will probably evolve to be less virulent, less deadly, but because of inaction, now this is what we have to deal with. John Washburn says the pandemic will not end. No, it can. It could. It definitely could. Binary Code says the pandemic will never end. We've been vaccinated since birth. He said, ignoring polio and measlingly. We've been vaccinated since birth. No one will ever end. I don't know how to respond to those kinds of things because I don't like a selective ignorance of history. We can put a huge roadblock in the pathway of infectious diseases. It's called science. It's called vaccines. And if we do it, though we probably can't eradicate COVID at this point, we can save millions of people. You've been vaccinated since birth because we don't want deadly infectious diseases to come back and run rampant through a population that's now more globalized than ever. And you ever look up a picture of what smallpox looks like? We've forgotten how effective vaccines are. We need to remember. BR says, what about ivermectin? There have now been, over the course of almost 2 years, a number of studies on ivermectin, and the results are either negative, meaning slightly damaging, or they're nothing. So the body of evidence around ivermectin right now is that it is either ineffective, or it's not effective enough to be a global public health policy. And you put that up against something like vaccines, which we have multiple versions of. They're free in a lot of places. We have billions of doses on the way. You put those two things next to each other. We know that they are very, very effective. You put those two public health options next to each other, and even if ivermectin was good, it's not as good. And again, we don't have that evidence to say that it is as good. The smallpox vaccine is actually a vaccine, says Monty. Vaccines can work in a different way. Vaccines inoculate you. So polio vaccines of olden days used a inactivated or weakened version of a virus to stimulate your immune response. I'm happy to report. Who said that? I'm happy to report. Whoever said that. I'm happy to report that these days we've gotten pretty sophisticated with our science, and now we can activate an immune response just by mimicking a protein that's on the surface of a virus. And so these mRNA vaccines are marvels of modern science that are extremely effective. We don't, Monty, you said that, we don't have to just kind of weaken an actual polio virus and give it to people. That does run a risk of infecting some people with polio, and that did happen. It cannot happen with these COVID vaccines. I call that a win. I don't know what you say, Monty. I call that a win. David Evans with the 50 says, Kyle, here's another 50. Thank you for doing this. My wife is immunocompromised and has a lung condition. It's in a very high-risk category. We need to get more vaccinated people to protect everyone. Not only does being a part of society mean doing your part for public health, it means looking after those who can't participate in the public health measure, like David's wife. Again, by ignoring the evidence and choosing not to be a part of society in this way, you are valuing your own personal experience against millions of immunocompromised people like David's wife, and that seems extremely selfish and unwarranted. Because we can do something. And if you choose not to do something, that's on you. Omega with the 10 says, Kyle, thank you for this. Despite the frustrations laid upon you, not been able to donate in the past, but here's a little. If you convince even one person, that's worth it, says Omega. Omega, I'm coming away from this, seeing what the chat is like. I don't know if I convinced anybody who isn't willing to be convinced. But I know this is a hard stream to do. It's going to affect my views. It's going to affect the channel. I feel like being a public science person, it is something that I must do. You think I don't want to talk about just cool sciencey stuff? I do. But we're all in this predicament together. And I want to bring more people into dealing with it together. Be with me. Please. I'm so tired. I'll take a couple more, but I can tell my voice is getting a little raspy. Heidi, thank you for being in the chat. Now, Leslie, this is a great thing to end on. Is natural immunity a real thing? 2 super important points. Two super important points here, Leslie. So important. Let's do this. I'm not going to put it in quotes. It is a real thing. What about natural immunity? Yes, you are less likely to develop COVID-19, the disease specifically, after previous infection. That is true. That is true. But do you know, let's look to the data once again. And what does the data say? However, the people who are the least likely to develop COVID are those that have both gotten COVID and have been vaccinated. This is the important point, Leslie. This is the critical point. Even if you have had COVID before and, fingers crossed, you don't have any long-term effects, which are much worse than anything the vaccine could give you, fingers crossed that nothing happened to you, you do have some residual immunity. Your immune response mounted itself. It's going to remember the proteins. It will do something the next time. However, getting a vaccine as well is supercharging your natural immunity. The people who are the least likely to get COVID again are those who have also been vaccinated. So it makes you superhumanly safe. And literally superhumanly safe. Literally super. And when I say that, I mean having COVID and then also getting the vaccine, you are less likely than any other human could naturally be to develop COVID. You are a superhuman. Become a superhero of public health. And I think, if this is your question, I believe your question is like a lot of other questions like this, which is, natural immunity is not a public health measure. Gets disease protection, millions of unnecessary deaths, many more long-term effects throughout life, and trillions done in economic damage. Natural immunity, less good than getting vaccinated, and it's basically throwing your hands up and saying, well, whatever happens, happens. That's not a public health measure. It's just not. Ximping says propaganda at its finest. Where am I? What? What propaganda is this? What propaganda is that? No, Derek, I see your question, but what propaganda this is propaganda from your immune system. Wild. I don't know where it comes. Russ Trotter with a 50. Alyssa with another 50. Even if you didn't convince someone here, you broke the information down, pointed the rest of us to some studies and data to share with people. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so here's another big one that people say. Jesus feathers. He didn't need to fly with he didn't have. The vaccinated can still catch and spread the virus. Therefore, the idea that vaccines protect others is negated. Incorrect. So we could literally do this all day, chat. But I don't want to do that all day. So but the vaccinated can still spread the virus. So what do we know about this statement? We know a couple of things. This is true. However, spread is much less likely. The vaccinated are much less likely to die. So, by getting vaccinated, you are both lessening the spread, even though it can still spread, and everyone who's vaccinated is less likely to die, less likely to have some long COVID, terrible health symptoms. So when you present me with an argument and say, but the vaccinated can still spread COVID, you say, but you spread it less and you're less likely to die. If if you're relegating yourself to getting COVID anyway, you're saying, what's the point? Would you rather be protected or not? Would you rather be protected or not? It is simply inarguable now, with billions of doses, with some of the largest health studies ever done on the planet Earth by humans, hundreds of thousands of people over many, many months, years now. We know that if two different groups of people are going to get COVID, the people who are unvaccinated will die more, have worse side effects, worse health outcomes, everything. It is always, in every one of these cases we've talked about today, in every single case, it is better to be vaccinated regardless. It's just true. Shimping says there has been no proof of that. See, now, Shimping, this is where our two paths diverge in a wood, and I take the path more science. You know what I mean? You say there's no proof that it's better to be vaccinated. The graphs of death rate for people who are vaccinated look like versus unvaccinated look like this. These are unvaccinated people. Everyone who's dying is unvaccinated. Almost nobody in our hospitals that are dying from COVID are vaccinated. Almost literally no one. So to say that there's no proof that the vaccine helps you, you are living in an alternate reality. I don't know what to tell you, man. I don't know what to tell you. What would I have to do? I Am Texas says, y'all are just built weak. Well, that's the kind of thing that someone who doesn't know anything about what we're talking about would say. Virus doesn't care how much you can bench press, I Am Texas. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. Ghost Yuki says something like less than 1% of deaths are vaccinated to some degree. Again, would you rather be protected or not? Reference your studies graph. Reference your graph, says Monty. Okay. I don't want you to see my search history. See if I can get a figure that shows exactly what I'm talking about here. Because I know the figure. I know the figure I'm looking for. This replicates across every area of the planet that we've looked at. Hashtag truth is treason says, Kyle, you're on the wrong side of history. I just don't know. I don't know where this comes from. I really don't. Truth is treason. I really believe that you are waist deep in a quagmire of information, of misinformation. The divergence in health outcomes between vaccinated and fully vaccinated could not be more clear if I faked it. Which, of course, I didn't. But this looks like a fake graph. This looks like a 95 to 5%. That's like I made it up. Like I'm trying to prove a point. But this is the data. You know, if truth is treason, if these two lines were identical and it was a 50-50 chance, we can start talking about these things, but it's not even close, man. It's just not. And if you don't believe the numbers coming out of every major scientific institution on earth for months and months and years, I don't know what to tell you, man. I just don't. I just hope that you or anyone you know doesn't end up alone with the tube down your throat, asking through coughs your nurse to FaceTime your family one last time. I really hope nothing like that happens to you or anyone you know. It's happened to me. Happened to people I know. And the sad thing is, Truth, the really sad thing is we don't have to hope. We could do something about it. We could do something about it. Chat. This is the longest office hours I've ever done. Getting a little emotional. I hope that anything that I've said, my hope beyond hope is that maybe if you were skeptical or you had questions, maybe I answered some of those questions. Maybe I encourage you to look in a certain place or not. That's all I can hope for. This week at the facility, we'll have much more fun things to talk about, like the science of cats, cat tongues specifically. Then, as many of you asked, we'll have our next Chernobyl installment. First video in February, I promise. If you want to catch me at the facility, if you want to talk to me every day on the Discord, get merchandise, get behind the scenes videos, live streams, all that stuff, patreon.com/Kyle Hill. Huge thank you to my mods, Jay and Heather, today. I know it's probably not easy, but again, I felt like we should say something if we can. If you liked anything that I said, share the video if you think it's helpful. I just hope that you stay safe, you stay smart, you stay healthy out there, and especially how it was getting in chat today. I think it's paramount when we are figuring out how best to live our lives in a society, especially online. I want you, no matter where I see you next, I want you to have a wonderful rest of your day, and be nice to each other, because this is all we got.